Welcome to Enlightenment of Change on webtalkradio.net. I'm your host, Connie Whitman. As always, thanks so much for tuning in this week. Now, I get it, right? Change. Oh my God, it's hard. My comfort zone is being expanded. I don't know what to do. Well, of course, I have a free gift for you to help you on that journey of change. So go to my website and take your free communication style assessment. You'll get 2 reports, which is kind of important. First report, it's going to share your superpowers and the natural way you show up and communicate. Flip side, you'll get your lowest score, which is really our blind spots. To me, that's the more important report, because if we don't understand where we're misfiring, we're missing sales, we're missing growth in our business, we're missing expanding client relationships. So go to whitmanassociates.com/CSA, my free gift to you. Now, my motivational quote today is by the amazing Jim Rohn, and he says, if you're not willing to risk the usual, you will have to settle for the ordinary. Now, recently I was asked, I was on a podcast, I was being interviewed, and I was asked, was I afraid when I started my business 20 years ago? And it's really weird. I had never thought about fear as being part of my decision-making process. I think I felt that I'll work hard, right? I'll figure it out, as I had always done, and would be able to move forward and create a profitable business, right? So failure for me kind of wasn't an option, which maybe is naive. I'm not really sure. But my perspective was just work hard, figure it out, deliver what the client needs, or actually over deliver what the client needs. Now, don't misunderstand me. I took that leap of faith really seriously. And before I opened my business, I had a plan in place, a business plan. I had money in the bank, and I had a clear vision of my ability and what I wanted to bring to the market. Now, remember, I had 2 babies at home. I had a mortgage. We needed my income. So being a risk taker is not in the cards for me, but being a calculated risk taker is where I landed. So again, I don't know that it was fear, but there was a strategic plan in place. So of course, today we're going to talk about taking those leaps of faith, opening a business. And I have 2 amazing guests, the dynamic duo, Carrie Bolig and Craig Klickner. And they're the co-founders of several companies, including Tandem Consulting and their nonprofit Tandem Giving Inc., which helps older children in the adoption process through advocacy adoption, which is awesome. Their business, which initially started as a side hustle, has allowed them to step away from their full-time corporate careers and instead become full-time parents and entrepreneurs, as well as recently being published authors with their book, So You Want to Start a Side Hustle. It's their best advice on how to get yourself beyond your idea or product and move to the next level to generate lasting success and revenue. Their book was published by McGraw-Hill and has been featured on Publishers Weekly's prestigious list of top business and personal finance books for 2021. And their lifestyle has enabled them to focus on what really matters to them: family, adventure, and impact. And they're passionate about using their coaching and their podcast, Tandem Talks, and public speaking to tens of thousands of people annually to pay it forward to others at the onset of their entrepreneurial journey. So I couldn't take anything out of that bio because it was too important. Please help me welcome Carrie and Craig to the show. So guys, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Connie. We're excited for this conversation. This is our bread and butter, and really what I think gets us both a little bit more alive is to talk about entrepreneurship, especially in the context of the early phases for both of us. So,
and what a wonderful communicator you are. I'm excited just to be on the call to hear you communicate. No, seriously, like obviously you just, in that part you read a bio, but even just the whole thing, like, wow, I'm impressed. Very, very fluid and very clear and succinct, which is not always easy to do. So I can see why you've had the success you've had. So,
oh, thank you. I love you guys. You know, what's funny, Craig? It's really funny. When I started the show, again, it was like 9 years ago. Yes, I'm one of the dinosaurs, but the person, the owner of Web Talk, she was coaching me. And one day she burst out laughing and I go, okay, I'm that funny. Like, what did I do? And she said exactly that. She said, because of your sales background and your ability to be curious about the client, you show up on on the show curious about whoever the guest is. And she says, and that creates that just engagement and dynamic conversation. So thank you for commenting. It's one of my superpowers, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yes.
We can see that.
Noted.
We're just confirming it for you.
Yeah, I love those confirmations. So thank you. All right. So let's dive in. And this is I think the most important first question I can ask is, number one, how did you start the side hustle and then really transform it into that full time? And you guys, I mean, you're super successful out there. How'd you do it?
Well, just give you a little bit of a background. So I studied finance and econ, got out with, banking jobs, and I was working for Deutsche Bank, G Capital. You mentioned risk. I was actually a risk analyst professionally in my career. So I assessed risk for other businesses. And the thing that I just started to realize early on is people talked about being an entrepreneur is risky, but we say that having one way to make money is risky, right? Especially in the 21st century, having
Agreed.
one skill set, one professional skill set, like I am engineer, I am programmer, I am marketer, that's risky. And so you don't want to just diversify your investments. You want to diversify your income streams as well as your skill sets. And so that came 10 years later. I was able to articulate that now, but initially I just realized I don't want to work for somebody else forever. I didn't like someone else controlling the way that I lived, my time, my money. And so it was like, what could I do? So I started investing in the stock market, real estate, but the challenge, the sexy things, everybody likes those things, but I couldn't scale those at 24 years old when I didn't have any more money.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Like I bought one property, but like, it's not when you're going to buy your first rental. It's when you're going to buy your 10th. So you can have a multi-million-dollar portfolio and replace your job income. So we felt like if we get one crack at life, we wanted it to be extraordinary. And being in a job exclusively was not going to get us there. So therefore we had to start pursuing other things. At the same time, as a banker and a risk analyst, I was not willing to just like live in my parents' basement and like sell off and take on a bunch of debt and borrow money. Like that just wasn't in my DNA or my karma. So I had to take a hybrid approach, and the beauty and strength of a side hustle is you can be doing both simultaneously, right? So how it happened though, is that I started to actually run into some other successful entrepreneurs who'd focused in building online community and driving revenue, affiliate marketing, direct sales, just like really basic type stuff. And for me, and ultimately for us, that was a great playground to get in the side hustle game because I didn't have a lot of capital risk. It was sweat equity risk. And I got to learn a lot. So we heard these people speak. We started following them around. Eventually, they agreed to mentor us. And from there, that's when things really started to take off. That's when I started to engage and build a business and on my evenings and weekends. And actually through them, I met a one Carrie Bowleg. So maybe I can like bounce past to her at this point in the journey.
Well, that was by the way, that was the most important connection you made, by the way, Craig.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Networking works, right?
It does,
Take notes on that, folks.
Find a spouse, right? Networking to find a spouse. It works.
But interestingly, though, in a more serious note, finding someone who's on the same path and trajectory and has some of the same values as you have can be just as important as some of the other superfluous things that we might think about traditionally. So anyways. Yeah.
Kara, do you want to add anything to Craig's intro with the side hustle and being mentored and all that? Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah. Well, and I come from an extremely different background, different lineage. I actually studied sociology and women's studies. So I graduated, I was thinking, how do I make a big impact? How do I, travel, immerse myself in other cultures? I really am a very adventurous person and didn't want every day to look the same, right? So what ended up happening though, is I got a job as a preschool teacher. And I got into that like daily grind of going to work 8 to 4 every day, Monday through Friday. And I think it just sparked something deep inside of me that almost developed a little bit of claustrophobia in a sense. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think more and more younger generations are feeling that pull to live life on their own terms. They've had so many more examples than previous generations of people who can live a more nomadic lifestyle or, run their own side hustle and scale it on evenings and weekends. And so for me, it just, even though I had never considered entrepreneurship, it was just a good gut check for me that like, I can't only have one way to make money, because if I do, I'm always under the thumb of an employer.
That's right.
And my employer's vision was not the same as my vision. So at that point, I just got very open-minded. I was not super concerned about like the vehicle or what I was going to do. It was more, how can I develop myself? Is there an environment where I can grow my skills? Particularly for me, my financial literacy. And not coming from a finance background, I had a lot of work to do in that department. I think that's so overlooked. You know, people want to scale a $5 million business, but they're not managing their $100,000 job income. And there's a huge disconnect on how they're going to really make that work. So that was another area. And then the last thing was just my confidence and self-image. Coming from a liberal studies background, not even having, not having business experience, but also not having professional experience yet. Yeah. That was a really big leap for me. And there's probably a lot of people in your audience who they're dabbling with entrepreneurship, and in their minds, they're like, well, I'm just kind of switching industries a little bit, but no, they're kind of switching quadrants altogether. If we think about Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant. Yep. So, sometimes people think it's a thin line to go from employee to, business owner, but it's kind of thick. And so I was just very candid about what I was going to have to do in terms of changing myself and really getting in the right environment with the right people. And luckily, one of those people was Craig, who has taught me a lot about business ownership and just overall mindset. So for me, that was really the genesis. And then we've locked arms. We've been married about 13 years now. And we offset each other very well. We've got a lot of differences. A lot of, strengths that overlap, but a lot of weaknesses that unfortunately also overlap. So it's an adventure in itself, building a business with your significant other and growing and evolving together.
Yeah, you guys said so many just wonderful things in just that little intro that you gave, and just some tremendous nuggets. So first, Craig, I want to comment on your background with banking and finance and risk. My background is finance as well. I have my Series 7 license, all my insurance licenses, et cetera. So I went that path, and you went the risk version. So, and I have an MBA in finance. So I see numbers, cool. I think numbers, I understand business. When I meet a business owner and they start talking, I'll be like, wait a minute, what about this? What about this? What about this? You don't have enough revenue streams, right? So that's I think that's how we're wired, because I double majored in finance and economics undergraduate, and then finance MBA. So I think that numbers, that business, seeing that, I think it's our natural superpower, probably why we gravitated to those degrees, right? So that was number one. Number two, when I mentioned I had 2 babies at home. I was 39 when I started my business, and banking back in the 90s, it was merger mania, craziness. And I was one of the executives who was kind of overseeing it. But I remember the bank that had bought us, and I came home to my husband, 2 babies at home, and I said, dude, like, I don't want to work for them. They're anti-customer service. I can't stand them. My husband was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to get fired, and I want to open my own business. And I was sharing with my peeps here in January of 2022. My husband and I'll be married 30 years. So he gets me, the dude gets me, right? But here's the important thing. I left because lack of my time. I was working extraordinary hours while having babies at home, which I don't mind working hard, but now you're not seeing your kid. And oh, by the way, I'm making money for this organization. And then the second piece of it, they were just starting. My big guy was going into preschool, and I wanted a mother help, and I wanted to be in the school, and I wanted to be present to let them know how important education was. So that was all catalyst for me to make my move. And then the risk taker, Craig, I want to comment one more thing on that, because I was a senior vice president and had I think about 13 years in that organization. I had a 13-month package. So we had money in the bank, I had the package, and I had my business plan. I knew clearly where I was heading. So that's why I was saying, it's calculated risk. It's not risk. So I hope everybody heard that too, because like Craig, they did it on the side so that you didn't have to live in a basement or on the street, because you don't want to be reckless. You want to be prudent in your decision-making, and you don't want to take on debt and end up behind the 8 ball, because that's just craziness and silliness. Right. And then Kara, I want to comment on how you started with the teaching, right? And transferable skills with all of that, by the way, right? So taking that sociology background and now applying it to the business, acumen and then leveraging on Craig with his skills. That's that yin yang. That's the magic, by being able to see each other's strengths. I don't love the word weakness. I say it's areas that we haven't really worked on, or that's areas for us to develop versus weakness. But I think the two of you that combination and that trust is really, really critical. And then the last piece I wanted to comment on, and everybody hear this, this was a big nugget that Craig threw out initially. He started researching and following people, and then he was bold and he reached out to those people and they started mentoring him. If you don't ask, you're never going to get someone of a caliber to mentor you. So by showing up, following them, probably Craig, both of you had super engaging conversations, thoughtful questions you were asking, that when you said, or they started speaking about the mentorship relationship, they saw that you were serious and that you were someone that they probably could teach and help you really be bold out in the marketplace. So I think we're afraid to ask for help, which is crazy, because I know if somebody approaches me, I'm like, I'll help you any way I can, right? And I know you guys feel the same way. We want to constantly be paying it forward because we've been so blessed in our businesses. So do you want to comment on any of that? There was so many nuggets in that, guys. I loved it.
Well, I think that's a good highlight and a good call out. And I think it's safe to say that most successful people don't have a lack of people who they could help. So it is this aspect of like waving your flag in the air, making some noise, and truly building a case as to why you would be a good person to invest into or pay it forward into. So I think that's a very, very strong suggestion I would echo.
Yeah, completely. Well, and we didn't, if you want, we can answer the second, how did we scale the business if you want us to go there.
That was my next question. Yeah,
there's
I
also
think that's
smart. There's a
yeah.
ton of us, we could get dialed into what we've talked about already, but do you want to pivot to that next part?
I do, because starting out as a side hustle, that's great, but like, then what? Like, where did you go from there?
Right. So we do talk a lot about, and this is a good segue, hopefully, focusing more on the who versus the what. So a lot of people are like, well, what product, what widget, what magical bean am I going to invent? And here's a big thing that we talk about is you don't have to be an inventor to be a business owner, right? As a former commercial banker, I saw a lot of business owners, and people owned McDonald's, they owned real estate, they owned, agencies, right? Like a real estate agency. Don't be an agent, own the agency, right?
Sure.
And so when you start to think of these things, there's a lot of systems that are already built. You don't need an idea. And the second thing I'll dispel, which is interesting, that kind of counterculture at times, is you don't have to be passionate to identify and start a business. You weren't probably passionate about your job. You used it as a vehicle to create income. You usually want to have an interest. You don't want to be like adverse to an industry or an idea or a product. But both of those things are just mistakes people make as they get going, where they don't really look at like the right who. They're trying to invent some random idea in their basement, and then they have to build it from scratch and manufacturing. And that's really hard. It can be done. But if you can know where you are on the spectrum of entrepreneurship. So I put one spectrum is like Elon Musk, right? Like he's super far and like brilliant, like live out of the trunk of his car, like invent thing after thing from scratch, like change the world, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the person who wants to sit in a cube and like never wants to do anything outside of that. Most people are in the middle somewhere. And so if you know where you are on the spectrum, then you'll also know what vehicles and what to you and who you should be listening to and who to pursue, because they've kind of gone through what you've had to go through. So
that's right.
From scaling, we scaled because we listened to people who had already scaled. Like I'd mic drop, but it would make a funny noise, right? It's like, it's so simple. Just like humble yourself. Like you just talked about having a mentor or coach, right? I think I wrote his name down. It's like that. If you wanted to learn anything, just dial into people who have already done it. And so we talk about change and all that kind of stuff. And for 10 years, different industry, different concept, 10 years, I failed at learning how to meditate. Like I just failed. I tried, failed, quit. Finally, I got a community and I got a mentor. And it's like, now I meditate on the regular, but that's because I have someone in my life who can like really guide me and customize it versus just random content on YouTube.
That's right.
I can't do that and can't hold me accountable. The videos on YouTube will not hold you accountable to your own word and your own goals and your dreams. So how do we scale? That's number one. Number two, we just worked our faces off. Like we just worked really freaking hard. And I know there's a lot of this life balance stuff and I'm all for it, but we balance really well now because we don't have to go to work. We have enough income. But in my 20s, when I was single, when I didn't have the kids, like we grinded and we didn't own a television for 10 years. We drove old cars. Like we made all of those like classic decisions that aren't sexy. Like I stopped watching football and playing fantasy football because I wasn't as interesting to watch other people get wealthy. I was more excited about my own wealth. So
That's right.
anyways, a lot of riffs there. So those are just two reasons we scaled. It took time. I think it was 4 or 5 years. We got to about $1 million. Carrie stepped away another 4 or 5 years. And then we got to about 3 million in revenue with our first business. And then we had an educational company that we built. From there, we have some other things we can talk about or not. But those things took time. And then I actually, my last 2 years in the corporate world, we banked like 110% of my salary. So when we left, we were cash flush. So absolutely.
And all important things. You can't, it's okay to say, I'm going to take the risk and take the leap of faith into entrepreneurship. Wonderful. That's wonderful. But you have to have a plan. You have to have the money, because you can run out of money really, really fast when you have no income coming in. So that I 100% agree. The other thing, I will always have a coach, right? I coach businesses, right? I have businesses that I coach. I will always have a coach, because you have blind spots, and people have heard this story. But when I hired my coach last year, I had a book that was published, international bestseller in 20 countries. I had been in business 20 years. So I knew what I was doing. I had a pretty good revenue stream coming in, multiple revenue streams, right? I had all of this curriculum and content over 20 years that I had created, all mine, for me figuring things out. And I had a podcast, right? The podcast. So I had all these 4 things. And I went to a workshop that he was running. And about 2 hours in, they gave us a break. And I ran up. My husband's like, how is it? And I looked at him and I go, how have I been in business 20 years? I think I'm an idiot. And he's like, why? And I said, I feel like I'm on the inside of the jar. I've done all these wonderful things, right? And I have all of these accomplishments. None of them are working together. What? Like, how did I miss that? Blind spot. So I believe we always need someone that, even if they're at the same level as you, hopefully they're a little bit ahead of you, but you need somebody to see your blind spots, because you're never going to see your blind spots. You don't know they're there. So I do believe in mentorship and coaching. And as a coach, I hire a coach because I think it's that important as well. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the scaling. You said it takes time. Have you ever noticed people say, oh, they were an overnight success? And I always look and I go, were they really an overnight success? I probably highly doubt that, because no one sees all of the pre-work and the effort. And like you said, driving my husband and I, we buy our cars and we drive until they have 300,000 miles on it. We always have. It's a liability. It's not an asset, right? So you start to define these things. But I think that was an important point as well. What are we willing to give up so that we can, it's like pulling the rubber bands back, and how do we get it to, catapult forward? It's not an overnight success. So that was an important thing. Carrie, do you want to add anything? Again, nice little nuggets in there, guys.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, I don't think people talk enough about progressive incremental growth and how powerful that is. Again, it took us 10 years to get both of us out of our traditional careers. That is not overnight. There was a lot of legwork, a lot of late nights, a lot of long weekends. But we also didn't have to take on the risk of not having a full-time job to pay the bills and put food on the table. So it's like, if people take a side hustle approach, it's so important to be realistic about the fact that you really are just taking some time outside your job and progressively compounding that over enough years. So I like to think of myself as an optimistic realist. So being aware that there's going to be a lot of hard aspects, like any business you start, there's a honeymoon phase where it feels blissful, it's sexy, you got your website, you got the business cards, you just like feel good about it. And then reality sets in and it's shit, this is actually hard. There's going to be some negativity. There's going to be some things that you actually don't know what to do to overcome. You have to pull in outside resources. Like there's all these things. It's not an easy path, even though it looks like it on the Instagram feeds. So you have to be prepared for that mentally and emotionally, knowing that there's going to be moments where you want to quit. There's going to be moments where you wish you didn't have that extra spark or that extra desire to not just be content in a 9-to-5. And I think it's really easy too, if you've got that like spirit about you, to also not be able to put the laser beam focus on one avenue. We've got 8+ different streams of income now, but for many years we were laser beam focused on like our initial side hustle, just because we had to develop the skills, the infrastructure, actually create revenue and profit. So I would say that's a mistake a lot of people make, is like, as soon as things get hard or they reach their threshold, it's like, oh, well, this won't work, so I'm just going to go start something else and think that's just going to be the ticket or the easy way out, when chances are everywhere you look in a business realm, there's going to be tough phases, and you have to mentally be strong enough to get through that.
It's true.
And the last thing that I would say is just, you know, enjoying the process. I talk about any content I create, I always end with enjoy the grind. And I'm very passionate about that saying, because
Mhm.
a lot of aspiring business owners or entrepreneurial minded people, there's like this intensity around finishing. And it's almost like you're climbing a mountain and you're like angry the whole time. You're like taking revenge on the mountain. And you're like, I'll be happy when I get to the top. Well, what happens when you get to the top? There's always another summit. There always
That's
is.
right.
And so I see a lot of people that we coach and in other industries just like bitter about the process. And it's like, it's your life. And meanwhile, there's entrepreneurs who have happiness and joy along the entire journey. And I just feel like we all have that choice in the
Great.
face of, you know, achieving success. And I would way rather be lighthearted and have a happy heart in the pursuit, because ultimately that's what draws people towards you anyways. And most
Exactly right.
businesses have some element of building community, right? Of rallying people around their product, their service, their vision. And so making sure you have the right spirit about you for your benefit, but also for others and the benefit of the growth of your business. So
Yeah, and that's the point of the show, guys, you know, enlightenment of change. Because if we, and I said this before we started recording, right? If we can't be healthy here in our own mindset and in our own heart, how can you possibly bring that forward and shine your light and create the change or help someone else change whatever it is that they're looking to achieve out there? It's hard. So we really do have to have that happy heart. And I know people are like, oh, Connie, Pollyanna. It's not about being Pollyanna. And you said something really important, Carrie. It's that optimistic kind of perspective, but that realist piece of it. And I often share, and I do this with my kids now, when they hit a crossroad, right? And they're like, oh, I can't do it. I don't allow the word can't in my house. You could choose not to do something, but don't tell me you can't if you've never tried, right? That's nonsense. But they're at a crossroad. And I always say to them, okay, what is the worst case scenario? Short of death, worst case scenario, you could deal with it, right? They're still living home and all of that. What's the best case scenario? Chances of that happening, maybe 10%. So where's the reality? Probably somewhere in the middle. That's the expectation. And then anything above that is gravy, right? But if you can deal with the worst case scenario and in your gut, it's like, God, I think I need to do this. Do it if you can live with the worst case, right? Because nothing's going to be worse than that. But I don't think people approach it from that logic slash, and I'm going to use the word optimistic. And I think that it's easier to be optimistic when you have that lens of reality on top of it, right? The worst, best case. And then really the reality is usually somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask, and then this is going to be our last question, but I think it's important because you guys are younger than me, clearly. But how do you maintain that happy heart, right? That enthusiasm, that optimism while managing, and let's face it, entrepreneurship, ups and downs, you know, COVID, you know, hit a lot of businesses, hit me directly, right? I had no income coming in. My husband lost his job. What do? Do you just crap out and say, all right, I'm done. I'm cashing out? Or do you find ways to reinvent and shift and create other revenue streams, right? So how do you deal with that, those ups and downs, and maintain that, just that exuberance for life?
I'll speak to that first, and then I'll be eager to hear Craig. You know, we've had some interesting things the last couple years hit us in terms of personal and business aspects. And there was a moment Craig and I were on a walk together. It was kind of somber for a few minutes there. And I just looked at him and we talked about this idea of like, if we're not fearful, kind of do exactly what you just said. If we're not fearful of the worst case scenario, because we actually deeply believe we can get through the worst or the hardest, like what do we have to fear in the world? We have like pretty much nothing, right? And so it was just this like rallying point of like, we got this, whatever comes our way, we're capable, we're willing to work hard, we're resourceful, we're creative, we have access to good people in our life.
Absolutely.
we can get through it all. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy or rosy or sunshiny all the time. But I think we just overall have that attitude of figure it out, and we will figure it out. And I think that served us very well. And just being agile and, having 2 kids, having children is not easy. It's joyful and
Especially
a blessing,
in COVID. Yeah.
but it's hard. I will be the first to admit that. I have an autoimmune illness that, kind of in the main peak of our business growth, where we were trying to get him out of his job, I got diagnosed with that. I mean, so
Ugh.
I could talk about self-care and like managing to your own needs for a long time, but I'll just say, like, make sure your cup is as full as you need it to be. It's going to look different for everybody what that threshold is, but it's hard to like overcome big things if you're not filling your own tank and
Agree.
operating from your best, right?
Yeah.
So
Agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Carrie's probably been better at enjoying the grind than I have in a certain sense. And so I think I've learned from her from that perspective. And at the same time, I think, there's a lot of new studies now saying that more dopamine is released in our bodies in the journey of pursuing something we want than once we actually accomplish it.
Yeah.
Because usually there's like a big spike in the dopamine, and then there's like a huge fall, and people are likely to go through light bouts of depression after they accomplish some big goal, like win an Olympic gold medal or whatever else it is, right?
Sure.
And so there's actually a lot of dopamine that's produced in the pursuit. And so one thing that I've learned about myself is that I love the pursuit. And I also love like the self-development that has to go into the winning.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, I know I have to be a certain person to win or lead organization or maybe write a book or like whatever it is. Like there's a certain type of development that I have to go through. And I think for me, that's very motivating. And so when now, as we take on entrepreneurial journeys or adventures, which we do, I kind of start with that. It's like, okay, what could I learn? How would this force me to develop in a way that gets me excited?
Yeah.
And so like recently we helped co-found a tech company, and that's like totally different than some of the other things I've done. And so we're putting a team together, and I raised money, and like all that stuff is like, I've done some of it, but not like in this very specific, very entrepreneurial, hardcore cash flow, like we need money, like environment. And so I've loved that because again, it's new. And so I think the challenge for a lot of people is we label and define ourselves as the thing we do.
Yeah.
And especially we're more dynamic than our job titles.
I agree.
And so a job, you can have so many things that you're good at, but your job title, your role, because it's very compartmentalized, doesn't allow you to do marketing. You might be an amazing public speaker. You just never had a breath of it. Right. And so, or you only did it once in class, like in 2000 and late. Right. So, I think what I've enjoyed is also realizing you don't have to be defined by a particular business or a particular, like I'm also a double econ finance major, right? So like that was my identity when I graduated.
yeah.
Sure.
But you are more dynamic than that if you have faith and you're willing to humble yourself and learn the skills of whether it's writing or starting a nonprofit. There's skill sets involved, and skills can
Absolutely.
be learned if you have the right attitude around it. And I think that gives me a happy heart as I'm in the struggle and the blizzard of entrepreneurship and fundraising or whatever else it is that you're doing. So
It's so funny, Craig. That's it for me. That journey of learning is just every day. I make sure I read something or I learn something, whether it applies or not. It's just for my own my own heart, right? To keep it in growth mode. And last year I'm laughing because you guys got into the online whole marketing digital realm way before I did. So for 20 years, I dealt with corporate clients. I would go speak live, everything I did was live. I would leave, working with the client and then go into a speaking event. Everything was live. And then COVID hit. And I remember thinking, I don't know Zoom. I don't know what a lead magnet is. And it was like this foreign language was in front of me, but I knew the opportunity was there. And my husband and kids were like, man, they would come down and say, do you know what time it is? My office is on the first floor, because I was taking class after class after class after class to learn. And my husband laughed. He goes, with the hours you're putting in, you're like a crazy person. But my kids were older, right? They didn't need me. And he said, I never see you happier than when you're learning, because as we're learning, I'm thinking, oh, I can now create that. I already have the curriculum, but now I have to market it. And this would be the ideal client for that piece that's already created on the small business side. I never had anticipated coaching or working with business owners, because my jam is corporate. I get in and I help them create a culture, and I help them, create this whole infrastructure of sales. That was my zone of genius. Now I'm finding business owners don't know what they don't know. And sales is this scary thing for them, because like you said, it's not, they're not a full-time salesperson, right? I'm doing quote unquote for the people watching on listening on Apple. They don't know sales. So then I come in and I start talking about sales, and I make it easy and fun and friendly. And that's the people that resonate with me. So again, that learning component just charges me up, because as we learn, it's the perspective, right? Our perspective grows. And that's when you start seeing the opportunity out here that you never saw when you were in here. That's the magic of learning for me, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
and
it.
again, to tie it back to the happy heart, like I know how I have a happy heart. I mean, sometimes it's aggravating because it's hard to learn and you get overwhelmed and you're like, I don't want to learn this, right? Or there's some aspect of an industry you don't care about, but you just have to like grind through it, right? But I think for me, that's how I've tapped into that a little bit more. And meditation has been really huge, because if you can't sit with yourself and just be with yourself, then everything you're doing is just like an escape. A lot of times is escapism anyways. Right. And so like, I think people sit and they meditate and oh, this is so hard, I can't do it or whatever. And it's like, if you can't just sit and be with yourself, like there's probably a lot of inner work to be done. Right. So that's also been helpful.
And that's the other thing, guys, right? The inner work, man. I tease with my husband sometimes, like something goes wrong and we get upset, right? Whether, something in the media, whatever's going on. And I look at him, because then we'll talk about it and frame it and put it in perspective, right? So you got to let it go, because it's nonsense, right? So you have to really, what's affecting me and mine, right? Me and my family. But my husband laughs, we giggle all the time. And I think we're very enlightened. We've done a lot of work on ourselves and we're struggling. How about the people? Maybe ignorance really is bliss, So we have those conversations too.
It's a good conversation, right?
It is, because the inner work, holy moly, it's inner work, right? You got to look at those, the dark sides of us, right? The shadow side of us. We're out of time, but oh my gosh, I could talk to you guys for like ever, because this is such great information, tangible for business, how to maybe potentially start a business and put real benchmarks in place, instead of, I'm going to be overnight success. Like you said, I'm going to find the next best thing and manufacture it. Really? Are you? So keep it in perspective, I think, is important. And then of course, the heart, the happy heart, and approaching life with your glass half full, because I agree with you guys. If that positive energy is going out, you're attracting that same wonderful dynamic opportunity of energy is going to come back at you. So we better be careful about what we think and what we feel, because it really does have an impact in our life. Guys, I know you need more Carrie and Craig in your life. So go to their website, which is tandemconsulting.co. It's not .com, it's .co. And Carrie, share with us, what's the email you want them to use?
Yeah, our email is hello@tandemconsulting.co. And we're also on LinkedIn, Instagram. We're on all the channels. So any way we can support people, reach out.
You're tapped in, right? You're tapped into all the channels, right? You're on Vibrate.
Well, LinkedIn and Instagram. Don't find us on Twitter, because I have a profile, but there's not enough. I can't give enough content on Twitter. So.
And that's another whole conversation. You can't be everywhere every day, because then you spread too thin and then you create crap and you don't have enough depth of what you're doing. So again, tandemconsulting.co or hello at tandemconsulting.co, not .com. I will put that all in the show notes. You guys, thank you so much for being on. I love you. I think you're amazing. I think what you're doing out there is amazing. Keep changing the world, keep shining bright, because you're awesome. You're the awesome sauce.
Well, thank you so much, Connie. This was a wonderful, wonderful dialogue, and let's keep it going. Well, more to talk about.
Absolutely. I think we see more shows in the future, my listeners, right? They're cool people to hang out with. And I do have the cool factor. So we got to keep it, we got to keep that going. Totally.
I could use some mentorship there probably. Thank you.
Yeah. No, you're awesome. Thank you again, guys. And thank you all for joining me weekly as we question, build, and discover together. No matter what change you're going through, I really, really hope that the show provides a forum or a foundation for you to get some tips and strategies and ideas. Don't just think about it, take them, apply them. The application is where the results and the magic come from. You have it within you. Please apply and share with the world. Excuse me. You've been listening to Enlightenment of Change with me, your host, Connie Whitman, on webtalkradio.net. I wish you all an inspired week. Pick one thing that Carrie and Craig shared today. Investigate, be curious, see what you come up with. Enjoy the journey, because that's where the magic is. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Craig and Carrie, for being on. You guys are awesome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.